Good afternoon and welcome to Stream Navigability in Virginia. My name is Renee Powers. I'm the Trails and Greenways Coordinator with Roanoke Parks and Recreation. Our objectives today are to understand past challenges with paddler navigability on Virginia streams, to understand current status of stream navigability for paddlers in Virginia, and to learn about the process paddlers in Virginia took to explore solutions to stream navigability challenges. And I should mention that throughout the PowerPoint, there are going to be pictures from streams that were opened to public access for paddling, and the name of the rapid and the stream will be underneath each picture. So before we go ahead and really get started, I do want to give credit to those who worked on this project. I feel like I am just the messenger today. Steve Kvek, an engineer with Virginia Department of Health, who is the Deputy Field Director for the Office of Drinking Water, was a main point person on this project. Peter Cott, Esquire, attorney with Crandall and Cott, Steve Powers, PhD, biologist at Roanoke College, were the three paddlers that really grabbed the reins and made this project happen. Also, credit is due to numerous kayakers, canoeists, and water and river enthusiasts who wrote letters of support to the Virginia General Assembly members for the Freedom to Float bills that we'll talk about in just a moment, and Senator David W. Marsden in the Virginia General Assembly, who facilitated reaching out to the Virginia Marine Resources Council for the letter on this subject. Let's start with some past challenges with navigability on Virginia streams. Really what it comes down to is the definition of navigable versus navigable in fact. Navigable in Virginia is not described specifically as something recreation-based. It's much more commercial-based. Was there some sort of commercial activity happening on a stream, whether they were floating logs down it or running barges down the stream, versus navigable in fact, which in our neighboring state of North Carolina is the if you can float it, you can boat it. If you can run a watercraft down it in a recreational capacity or a commercial capacity, it is then deemed navigable. So that's really the crux of this. Going along with that are some King's grants. King Charles of England from the 1600s did grant land to folks living in Virginia. Some of the land grants include just the land, include land streams, bottomlands, fish in the water itself. And before this letter, the burden of proof, if you were quote unquote a trespasser on the stream, was to prove that the King's grant did not exist versus the landowner proving that it did exist. It was kind of really a backdoor way of putting a lot of power into these King's grants. And somebody that's a landowner can just say, well, I have a King's grant, and had no need to prove it. And it would literally be on the paddler to say, no, I've done the research. They actually don't have that grant. Other past challenges include private landowners and public stream and access points. So the Virginia Bottomlands Act talks about how, streams and the bottom of those streams are owned by the state of Virginia. So even if something is a public stream, if it doesn't have public access points, you can't just trespass over private land to get to a public stream. And then another issue is paddler respect for private land. Taking advantage of access now means access forever. So this is something, and I'll talk about it more throughout the presentation, but it's not over, quote unquote. It's just where we're at now with this process. And I think something really important for everyone to remember that recreates on rivers and streams is not only are those streams and rivers always changing, but access can also change depending on what party is in power or what landowner or what type of use that stream has. So how did a small group of paddlers activate the democratic process? In 2013, a group from coastal canoeists, the folks that I listed off in the beginning of this presentation, some folks from American Whitewater, got a whole bunch of people who are river enthusiasts together to write letters and make phone calls to representatives for the Virginia General Assembly. And this Freedom to Float bill loses by one vote. And very often through this process, many of the folks involved would hear, but who's behind this? Many of those elected officials are used to working with lobbyists, really powerful industries, and that really wasn't the case here. It was just a bunch of people who were voters that live in Virginia that were passionate about being able to paddle a whole bunch of creeks that they weren't legally able to at the time. So it was kind of a unique, real true democracy happening where people rose up, wrote these letters, made these phone calls, talked to their elected officials, and really got in their ears about something. So even though it didn't pass, it only lost by 1 vote, there was a lot of momentum in 2013 for this freedom to float bill, which was trying to change the definition of navigable to navigable in fact. So in 2014, again, got together, had Senator Marsden sponsor the bill. The second freedom to float is defeated easily, unfortunately. The Farm Bureau got involved with their lobbyists, talked to those same elected officials, and had concerns about private land, people floating through farm fields on really small streams that weren't at all what this bill was talking about. But with the lobbyists getting involved, there was a lot more money behind that industry. We didn't have any money behind us. We're just people who paddle on rivers, and it was easily defeated, unfortunately. So that didn't work. So there was a couple of different things that we had talked about doing, and when I say we, it's Steve, and Pete, who really were spearheading the effort at this time. My husband, Steve Powers, and I were paddling Mason Creek near Salem, Virginia, and at the takeout saw a sign for the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, or the VMRC, and it basically talked about VMRC designation of navigability. So took a picture of that sign, did some research, and Steve Powers brings it to Steve Kvek and Pete Cott and says, what if we ask Senator Marsden for an attorney general opinion on all of these streams that we're talking about not being able to paddle through the VMRC? So Steve Kvek reaches out to Senator Marsden, and he asks for a list of streams that are in question. He needed GPS coordinates for those access points, the put in, the takeout, the size of drainage upstream of the put in, the size of drainage upstream of the takeout. And what results is a letter from John M.R. Bull at the VMRC, signed March 17, 2015, basically stating, based on our evaluation, all of the stream segments are in areas with watersheds greater than 5 square miles. As such, based on our subaqueous guidelines, which are attached, the Marine Resources Commission considers the subaqueous beds of the stream segments to be state-owned, pursuant to Code Section 28.2-1200, unless it can be shown that the stream beds have been conveyed by a special grant or compact according to law, or the beds are within streams considered to be non-navigable for grants of riparian land prior to 1792 in the part of the state that drains to the Atlantic Ocean, or in 1802 in the part of the state that drains to the Gulf of Mexico. So the question of navigability is a question of fact as to whether a stream is being or has been historically used as a highway for trade or travel, or whether it is capable of such use in its ordinary and natural condition. So basically all perennial streams with a drainage area greater than 5 square miles or a mean annual flow of 5 cubic feet per second are navigable in fact until evidence is presented proving non-navigability. So changes stuff a little bit. The definition doesn't necessarily change in a statute at the state level, but it says that all of these streams listed here, 14, really 15 with Colliers and Buffalo Creek, are navigable unless the landowner now proves that they have that King's grant that says they own the water, they own the fish, they own the bottom land. So it turns the table to the person claiming to have that ownership to actually prove that ownership. And that really changes quite a bit in the area. Johns Creek is the one that has the biggest drainage. Many of the pictures throughout this presentation are of Johns Creek because it's 30 minutes from my house, and Barbers Creek is about 40. But so many of these along Western Virginia are just high quality whitewater runs for skilled kayakers and canoeists that had some issues along the way, or could potentially have some issues with access. So really the question then was, it's March, what does this letter mean? So navigability, the statute, like I mentioned, does not change at the state level, but VMRC right now is tasked with managing the state-owned waters. So Thaddeus Cox is the Commonwealth attorney in the area that had done prosecution of trespassing on paddlers in the past, specifically on Johns Creek. So the question was, let's ask him. And Pete Cott reached out to Thad, and basically Thad said, well, if it's navigable, then I can't process someone for trespassing if it's owned by the state. So it's not technically trespassing, according to this. So there was obviously some uneasiness with this because it's not 100% changed. It's not 100% different with statutes and things like that. So the question was, do we just paddle it? And obviously we did. So otherwise we wouldn't have all these great pictures and great experiences the last 5.5 years. What was kind of ironic is in 2015, we ended up being in a drought. So it didn't run until October. So there was all this momentum for March. And usually that's such a wet season for around here. And then we didn't paddle until the first weekend in October. But anywho, some challenges that still exist today. First and foremost, I would say that paddlers that didn't live through this process aren't necessarily all respecting the work. Folks that were not living in the state or maybe really young at the time, and now 5.5 years later, they're old enough, they're paddling, don't necessarily understand the struggle and the frustration of not being able to paddle these 15 creeks. Maybe not respecting private land as much, not understanding why some of us are so cautious about who we take down these streams, or cautious about staying in our boats and not trespassing. And communicating that can sometimes be a challenge. The other challenge, like I said, is this can be undone by someone who has enough time and money or a change to VMRC responsibilities. There's no statute on the jurisdiction of the VMRC. We used legal channels to get this opinion, but if somebody else uses legal channels to challenge it, there's no saying whether it will or will not stand up in court. There's also still the issue of the definition of navigable versus navigable in fact. Currently in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there is no statute defining navigability as navigable in fact. And then the last challenge is a local issue. It doesn't apply to all waterways in the Commonwealth. If the stream isn't listed, it's not covered unless it's already deemed navigable because of that commercial use. So Craig Creek has had commercial use, the James River has had commercial use, the Potomac has had commercial use, the Roanoke River has had commercial use, the New River, but there might be smaller streams, other places in the state that haven't had that commercial use, but are streams that paddlers really enjoy boating. And because we were all local to the Western Virginia, Southwest Virginia areas, we really only work with paddlers. And when I say we, it's Steve, and Pete, reached out about streams kind of in this half of the state. So where do you go from here in terms of, can this be replicated elsewhere, or education within the community and things like that? I think education is key, talking to folks, reminding them that nothing is ever set in stone. Just because you have access today doesn't mean you're going to have it forever. In terms of recreating this, having a small group of focused, efficient, connected paddlers with professional skill sets to work on this type of project is key. Both Steve, and Pete are all whitewater paddlers in some way, but also have these specific professional skill sets that they were able to bring to the table and, be a small group of really passionate, dedicated people to work on this. It's also critical, according to Steve Quebec, to have an elected official that cares about the issue, not someone that's just going to put it on their docket, but really someone who's passionate about it, like Senator Marsden, who is willing to really, do some mentoring, make some time for meetings, and go out there on a limb in some cases with some of the ideas like going to the VMRC. If you're going to go big, get ready for lobbyists from big industries. That was kind of a shock to the folks working on this, and can't compete with a lot of money if you don't have any. If you're going to go small, it might not stand the test of time. Like I said, so far, what has been done has stood that test of time, but it won't necessarily, if that goes to court and there is a challenge to the jurisdiction of the VMRC. And then public access on streams is really the key to success. You can have a state-owned waterway, but if you don't have a public way to access that, you can't trespass across private land to get to it. So really focusing on those public access points and making sure that you can access those navigable streams or paddleable streams is really important. So with that, this was a lot of information on something that was a multi-year project that we didn't have a long time for. So I would love to field some questions. If anybody wants copies of the VMRC letter or anything like that, feel free to give me a shout. Thanks.